collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, we hear from the Swedish ambassador to Nicosia about support for the Home for Cooperation.
Confidence building and, for example, by communal activities, by communal dialogues, are very good examples of creating confidence. And through creating confidence, you create a conducive climate.
And we hear what some of the keynote speakers and panellists had to say at the recent Economist conference, including Nicholas Burns, former US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, talking about US foreign policy and the Eastern Mediterranean, Associate Professor at the London School of Economics, Spyros Economides, will talk about the efforts for peace and stability at the crossroads of three continents, and the Managing Director of the European Stability Mechanism on the post-pandemic economic and financial prospects for Europe and Cyprus. We've been covering over the last few weeks the developments in the occupied areas of Cyprus, but there was great news this week when we heard that the Swedish Embassy in Nicosia had made a substantial donation to help the Home for Cooperation located in the Cyprus buffer zone to continue functioning. We're joined on the programme this week by His Excellency Anders Hagelberg, the Swedish Ambassador to Nicosia. So Anders, tell us a little bit first, if you will, about the whole support mechanism that I think I'm right in saying your embassy has for years been trying to establish and really create the necessary friendship and infrastructure for bi-communal cooperation.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this program. And what you're referring to is, of course, a long-standing general support from Sweden to Cyprus and the people of Cyprus. We started already long time ago to support Cyprus with UN troops. There have been about 25,000 UN troops from Sweden here during the years. During the past 10 or 11 years, the main concentration on Swedish support has been the way we are supporting the so-called religious track, the religious dialogue among the five leading religious leaders in Cyprus, and that religious track is under the auspices of Sweden. But this time we got a request from Home for Cooperation. They are struggling, as so many others, during the corona crisis, and they really got economic deficits, economic challenges, and Sweden was able to identify a possibility to support Home for Cooperation with 1 million Swedish crowns. This will not, of course, sustain forever, but hopefully also COVID-19 will end sometime during next year, in a way so Home for Cooperation is able to return to their normal way of activities.
Yes, because it is a small business, as it were, isn't it? I suppose we should just, for people who aren't familiar with it, explain that in the buffer zone it is a cafe, a meeting place. They hold seminars, they hold exercise classes. People can use the facilities there and access it both from the north and the south of Cyprus without actually physically crossing over into the other part of Cyprus. So they must have been struggling very greatly, I would have thought, with the coronavirus, because their trade was always probably fairly small, but it must have dwindled to pretty well nothing now.
And as you say, it's quite small, but at the same time, I think it's maybe the most important organization when it comes to create confidence among people, when it comes to generate bi-communal activities when it comes to being a kind of umbrella for civil society organizations working with bi-communal activities. So in that sense, I would say it's first of all, or maybe the symbol of bi-communal civil society activities on this island. But not only the symbol itself, it is also unique and absolutely vital organization and meeting place for all these activities, and also to generate that kind of activities.
Yes, there are a lot of young people, aren't there, because they have art exhibitions, they have music events with bands comprising both Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. And I think I'm right in saying that in the past, Sweden has also sent several times conflict resolution experts over to hold seminars and so on here.
Yeah, we have had a lot of people engaged, and whatever we can do, of course, we are very happy, very grateful to provide this island with some possibilities. But of course, most important is, of course, that the Greek Cypriots, the Turkish Cypriots, will be able once again, after COVID-19, to develop more possibilities of meeting each others. And whenever we are able to come with some impetus, come with some inspiration, of course we are very happy to do it. It's all a matter of peace building, but peace building is not only, so to say, dealing with security. Peace building could very well also be to meet each others when it comes to joint challenges. One challenge I could mention is, for example, trafficking. We have an ambassador for combating trafficking, and I'm sure he will come to the island as soon as it's possible. But I can also imagine to work between the different groups on this island when it comes to the challenge of climate change would definitely be, first of all, necessary, because we all need to engage ourselves in the combat against climate change. But it's also a bridge builder itself to have activities against climate change.
Can I just ask you about the current climate? And I'm not talking about climate change here. Very difficult past week or two with the visit of Tayyip Erdogan to the north, with the opening up of the beachfront at Varosha. And a lot of people are looking at whether or not bridge building is going to make any difference, because the mood seems to have changed. Now, how do you view that as the Swedish ambassador?
I think Special Representative Elizabeth Spear used a very important expression. She talked about conducive climate, and I really think conducive climate is what is needed. And here, Home for Cooperation, here by communal activities are key to generate such conducive climate. Besides that, when you refer to the Cyprus issue in general, of course, Sweden is very, very much in line with UN parameters. So the parameters so many times repeated by the United Nations Security Council.
Now, before we go, let me just ask you about your previous experience, Anders, because you've served in other countries, I believe, where conflict has been resolved. Were you able to play a part in that conflict resolution? And how similar were those situations to what we have now in Cyprus?
I was ambassador in South Africa some years ago, and after that in Bosnia, and now in Cyprus. And there are many differences, of course, between countries. But at the same time, all three countries are struggling with their history. But at the same time, I have become very, very convinced that confidence building is key when it comes to building and, for example, by communal activities, by communal dialogues, are very good examples of creating confidence. And through creating confidence, you create the conducive climate. The other way around, just negotiations without any confidence-building measures would be very fragile. To make a peace sustainable, you really have to have prepared everything with confidence building. South Africa was very advanced when it comes to reconciliation. When it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina, yes, they had their peace treaty since 1995, but still they needed more confidence building really to make it functional. So I think there are some lessons to be learned, but at the same time, of course, each country has its own merits, so you cannot just copy. But the key word for me is really confidence building, and hereby communal activities are so important.
Well, I must say that I'm sure everybody who is a regular at the Home for Cooperation will be thrilled to know that your help from the Swedish Embassy is going to at least keep its doors open, hopefully until the spring or maybe even longer, and until we can get through this coronavirus crisis. Ambassador Anders Hegelberg, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you very much.
The 16th Cyprus Summit, organised by The Economist, was held virtually this year. It happened on Tuesday, and we are joined by some of the speakers to hear what they had to say. First off, let's hear from Nicholas Burns, former US Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs, talking about US foreign policy and the Eastern Mediterranean.
It's an exciting time here in the United States. I supported former Vice President Joe Biden, now President-elect Joe Biden, during the recent campaign, was an advisor on his campaign, and I think we're beginning to see his new administration take shape. He's going to be officially announcing later, in just a couple of hours, his new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, his new National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, his new ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and his new special envoy for climate change, former Secretary of State John Kerry. This is a powerful team. It's a team of serious people. They're very experienced. They have a sophisticated view of the world. They understand that the United States needs to return to the world and re-engage with the world, both with Greece, with Cyprus, as well as the European Union and NATO in Europe. And I think we're beginning to see the Donald Trump administration fade into the rear view mirror. President Trump's attempts to contest the election have been widely dismissed by the courts. There's no question that Joe Biden will be president, Kamala Harris vice president, at noon on January 20th. So we're finally free from what I believe to have been the weakest American presidency and the most destructive, that of Donald Trump, over the last 4 years. So what will the future hold? I think the future is very clear for President-elect Joe Biden. He wants the United States to return to the Paris climate change talks. That's the appointment of John Kerry. He wants the United States to return to full membership in the World Health Organization and to take our place, along with countries like Greece and Cyprus and others, to help fight the pandemic globally. We in the United States prioritize our alliances. That means we very much value NATO. President-elect Biden has a long track record of support for NATO, and that will continue, as well as support for the European Union and our strategic partnership with the European Union. It also means, of course, that the United States is going to be active in the Indo-Pacific. I think the most challenging issue we're going to face, apart from climate change in the next decade, will be our very complicated relationship with China. We are competing with China for military primacy in the Indo-Pacific. We're competing with China on trade issues, on digital age military and civilian technologies, and we're competing on values. But we also need to work with China, and that's where the pandemic comes in. We ought to be working with China. And that's where climate change comes in. We ought to be working with China because we're the two world's largest carbon emitters. I will say this. I'm very hopeful that you're going to see a very active American policy in southeastern Europe. I want to credit my good friend, Ambassador Jeff Pyatt, with having been an outstanding American ambassador to Greece. And my sense is that U.S.-Greece relations, but Minister Dandias will speak about this, are very, very strong. That's a credit to the Prime Minister, someone I've known for 20 years and have deep, deep respect for, Prime Minister Mitsotakis. He's a true friend of the United States. I credit Minister Dandias and his counterparts for the rise of Greece, the recovery of the Greek economy, the extraordinary recovery we're seeing in Greek society. I know it's a tough time with the pandemic, of course, in Greece and Cyprus, but I'm just so pleased to see the United States relationship with Greece in such strong shape. And I think I want to credit the minister and my friend Jeff Pyatt for that. I think as well on Cyprus, the United States has a very close relationship with Cyprus. And with Greece and Cyprus, we've got to be supportive, in my view, the United States, of the right of Greece and Cyprus to drill for natural gas in the Eastern Mediterranean without interference by Turkey. Turkey has been very aggressive in contesting both Greece, Cyprus, as well as Israel. Turkey has made claims that cannot be substantiated legally about the Greek-Turkish border. I think it's very important that NATO and the European Union and the United States make it clear to the government in Turkey that they have to abide by international law. And so I think this trend of the United States growing closer to Greece and to Cyprus, I hope very much will continue. I think it's very important for peace and stability and the rule of law in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Another panel dealt with efforts for peace and stability at the crossroads of three continents, and one of the speakers there was Associate Professor in International Relations and European Politics at the London School of Economics. He is Spyros Economides.
The first point is that I think we need to be very clear that the whole issue surrounding hydrocarbon energy reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean has become increasingly politicized and has lost any kind of economic residual value that it may have had. A lot of what we talk about in terms of what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean since the summer is about the politicization of hydrocarbons and the political contestation that's going on around them. And in a sense, we've lost sight of any commercial or economic value they may have and how this may be utilized. We speak the language of regional development, etc. But in practice, what is going on is a highly politicized game around these energy reserves, which could have very unfortunate consequences. The second point, broad point I'd like to make is that what we've seen returning to the Eastern Mediterranean in the last few months is a very harsh form of geopolitics. We may speak the language of good neighborliness, we may wish to have stability and peace in the region, but what's happened increasingly in the last few months is an increasingly complex web of geopolitical entanglements, if you want, entangling alliances, which include not only the states of the region, but also extra actors from beyond the region, which makes the situation complicated. It adds a degree of strategic value to the region, which perhaps has been lost over time, and really reinforces the fact that we've moved away from the politics of values and rights and norms in Europe and really moving towards a realization that realpolitik and geopolitics do matter in our international interactions, and we have to appreciate that. The last point I'd like to make relates directly to the point the Minister made about European solidarity. And I think what we've come to see very recently is that what is going on in the Eastern Mediterranean is posing extremely difficult problems to the European Union in its foreign and security policy. Because what is at stake here are the rights and increasingly the interests of two member states, Greece and Cyprus. And the European Union, if it is going to show solidarity, if it is going to follow all the precepts of European foreign policy with respect to promoting rights, in this case international legal rights, and defending the interests of its member states, in this case the interests of Greece and Cyprus, it has to move forward and be very clear and categorical about what kind of actions it's going to take vis-à-vis those who are challenging the rights and interests of Greece. But we've seen that within the European Union there are diverging paths. There may be other member states who see value, or perhaps greater value, in geopolitical interests which are served with countries who are outside the European Union. And this causes ruptures within the foreign policy facade and the security interests of the European Union, which have immense consequences. There is evidence for this. The EU has procrastinated endlessly about, for example, imposing economic sanctions on Turkey. We moved from one summit to the next, threatening and then removing the threat, then threatening again and removing the threat. So there is a conundrum here for Europe. Does it defend the rights and interests of two member states, or does it succumb to some kind of other geopolitical concern which renders it impotent to act in the face of external provocation?
The panel dealing with the post-pandemic economic and financial prospects for Europe and Cyprus featured Klaus Regling, Managing Director of the European Stability Mechanism.
Europe is experiencing, without doubt, the most challenging economic and financial crisis in our lifetime. Economic activity came to a halt in March after bottoming out in April. Data confirmed a strong recovery phase from May onwards as the lockdowns were lifted. However, the recovery lost momentum in August, and now, as we are experiencing the second wave, the pandemic weighs again heavily on our economies. Latest forecasts suggest that economic activity in the euro area will only reach its pre-crisis level again in late 2022. And the recovery is likely to be uneven across member states. How has Europe responded to this unprecedented crisis? Looking back, Europe provided a quick and well-coordinated policy response. Already by the beginning of April, the European economy was protected by 3 safety nets worth 540 billion euro. Each of these safety nets has a different purpose. First, the ESM's pandemic crisis support helps countries to cover direct and indirect healthcare costs. And although no money has been requested, the mere existence of our pandemic red line has calmed financial markets. Second, the Commission's SURE program is the safety net for workers. And the third safety net, the new guarantee fund of the European Investment Bank, can be used to finance additional corporate investment. But the European rapid response did not end there. Monetary policy measures by the European Central Bank stabilized financial markets. And then, in July, the 750 billion euro Next Generation EU Recovery Fund was adopted. The 3 safety nets and the Next Generation EU Fund were all designed in a way that countries most affected by the pandemic will receive more support. This unprecedented degree of solidarity is important to protect the EU single market and to avoid excessive divergences in our monetary union. Cyprus will receive a substantial amount of money from the European funds. This money presents Cyprus with a good opportunity to continue its structural reform efforts. In addition to these Europe-wide initiatives, all EU member states responded to the crisis with extensive national fiscal policy measures. Also Cyprus. The Cypriot government put together a fiscal support package that alleviated the immediate impact of the crisis on the Cypriot economy. President Anastasiades mentioned at the beginning of this conference this afternoon that this policy package amounts to 1.3 billion euro. It protects the country's workers and firms. But every European country needs to recognize that these immediate measures must be accompanied by longer-term policies. policies will need to reflect the particular challenges in each country. Cyprus is a small open economy. It is exposed to a number of external risks. For example, during the first half of this year, tourist arrivals decreased by 85% compared with the previous year. Cyprus could make its economy more resilient by decreasing its dependence on tourism and diversifying further into other areas. The European Commission expects economic activity in Cyprus to fall by 6.2% this year, before recovering in 2021 and 2022. And Cyprus has other challenges to overcome, particularly in its banking sector. The amount of non-performing loans in the balance sheet of Cypriot banks remains the second highest in the euro area. The Cypriot government has partially addressed this issue. Between 2014 and the first half of this year, the stock of NPLs declined from 24 billion euro to around 5 billion euro, a real significant progress, but still a high level. However, since non-performing loans will remain a challenge in the future, the legal framework needs to be strengthened, including the insolvency and foreclosure law. These are important challenges for Cyprus. The current crisis is very painful for all of Europe, but at the same time it also provides the opportunity to accelerate structural changes in our economies and to accelerate progress towards deeper European integration, which I believe is crucial to overcome this crisis and to position Europe better in a changing world. Future growth in Europe is potentially affected by several problems. First, the pandemic destroys physical and human capital. Precautionary savings are up, and some investors will be reluctant to invest for some time given the uncertainties. This will depress demand. Second, the collapse in world trade and deglobalization mean less competition and thus lower productivity gains and lower growth. Third, banks continue to make too little profits in Europe, and NPLs will go up as GDP declines. This may limit banks' ability to provide sufficient credit for the recovery. And fourth, the higher public debt, although indispensable under the circumstances, can have a negative impact on growth in the long term. All these negative factors come on top of the well-known demographic problems, and all this is likely to lead to a potential growth rate after the crisis that may well be lower than before the crisis. Faced with these challenges, what can we do? The European agenda must focus on productivity and competitiveness, on making the European economy greener and more digital. That is exactly the objective of the New Generation EU Recovery Fund. A lot of money will be available. It must be used productively for investment and to support reforms in order to strengthen growth and to transform the European economies. In addition, we should also continue to deepen our monetary union. Important steps have been taken during the last decade. To complete this process and to make economic and monetary union more resilient and less vulnerable, additional steps are desirable. First, the completion of the ESM reform. In the future, with the revised ESM treaty, the ESM will provide a backstop to the Single Resolution Fund, increasing its financial firepower to deal with bank resolutions. That step is important to complete banking union, which also needs a common deposit guarantee and a better crisis management. Second, we need progress towards a capital markets union that would integrate the 27 national financial markets that we have today. Progress on the capital markets union would improve the allocation of capital in EMU, lead to more private sector risk sharing, increase the growth potential, and make the euro more attractive for international investors. Third, a fiscal stabilization instrument would help to shield economies of the euro area against future shocks. This would allow for more fiscal risk sharing. Such a permanent facility, which could be a revolving fund and not a budget, would give countries the opportunity to expand their fiscal space in a downturn. Several of the steps I mentioned are rather controversial among our member states. It will therefore take years to reach consensus and to implement them. But it would lead to a more integrated Europe, a more robust economic monetary union, and stronger growth. Such measures will help us to reach a vision of Europe that is more innovative, more resilient, and more sustainable, and where the international role of the euro would be stronger. And that is the euro that we all want, I believe.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.